Our opening thought comes from a poem written by Ralph Waldo Emerson, a poem that in high school I had pinned to the headliner of my car, not knowing who Ralph Waldo Emerson was. Illusion works impenetrable, weaving webs innumerable. Her gay pictures never fail, crowd on each other, veil on veil. Charmer, who would be believed by humanity who thirsts to be deceived. And our second thought comes from the writings of Northrop Frye. Also appropriate for what we're going to be doing this morning. Reading from a passage in biblical and classical myths. The fall of man is described very obliquely in the book of Genesis. There are two trees, we are told, a tree of life and a tree of knowledge. According to the principle of metaphor, they are clearly the same tree. The forbidden tree has a cursed serpent crawling limply away from it on its belly. And as the serpent is frequently a sexual or phallic symbol, one would expect that the tree of life, in the original version of the story, would have had an erect serpent climbing through its branches, as it still does in certain symbolic systems, such as those of Kundalini Yoga in India. Elsewhere, too, the serpent is a symbol of wisdom, so that the knowledge that humanity gained by the fall through the subtle course of knowledge, which was something to do with the discovery of sex as we know it, because soon as this knowledge was acquired, Adam and Eve knew that they were naked and looked for clothing. Thus, the original unfallen state is apparently conceived as being a sexual ideal of the kind that we have since lost key to. So be the second reading. We have another reading from the Unitarian Universalist Purpose and Principles, which we are reconsidering for the second time since the founding of the movement, when Unitarian and Universalist merged. The living tradition we share draws from many sources. Direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces that create and uphold life. The words and deeds of prophetic men and women, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Wisdom from the world's traditions, which inspire us in our ethical and spiritual life. Jewish and Christian traditions, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against the idolatries of the spirit. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote
the inherent worth and dignity of every person,
justice, equity, and compassion in human relations.
Acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations.
A free and responsible search for truth and meaning.
The right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large.
The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all.
Respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part.
I decided this morning that I wanted to talk about the first one. The only one I've ever had any problem with at all. Well, that's not quite true. I mean, if you want to be a pickpuss, which I can be with great finesse, you can find little niggling problems here and there. And niggling problems are important. Usually it's these little niggling problems we face that it's hard to understand, hard to explain. You ask somebody to explain a little niggling problem, they give you a superficial gloss. This is what it means, and you say, oh, and you walk on, and the problem's never been solved. Niggling problems, when you finally solve them, there is usually something like an iceberg under the water for which the niggling problem was only the tip. And when you find out what the iceberg has to say, it transforms everything totally. Everything you knew before falls apart, and it all has to be rebuilt. So take niggling problems seriously. In our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every human being, I have a problem. Why do we have that? Well, we have that principle, and it's very important. I really ultimately have no problem with the principle per se. But the reason we have that is because we had had century upon century upon century of understanding what is the nature of humanity. And this statement is indeed a statement about the nature of what it means to be human. And it says of all of us, we have inherent worth and dignity. Well, what could be the alternative? We are prone to sin, and that continually. Because of the fall of humanity, the Spirit of God was withdrawn from man. We were deprived of the Spirit, and therefore, generation by generation by generation by generation, we are depraved. We are prone to sin, and that continually. And you know what happens if you're prone to sin and that continually and you don't do something about it? Well, you get to go to hell. Now, some of that sounds all right because that way you can see all your friends. But you know what that says about human nature? It says intrinsically, down inside, you are nothing short of rotten. Through to the core. And a society will set up a series of standards. Here are the standards to which you will abide. And if you do not abide, we will criticize you. We will not only criticize you, we will ostracize you. We will punish you. We will make life difficult for you. So come to church and get the problem solved, and don't forget the offering plate.
Amen.
The whole point of the idea of saying there is inherent worth, and dignity in human beings is to take a look at that anthropology of how rotten we are as human beings and turn it on its head. Because there is, if you follow that anthropology, this difficulty in explaining how is it so many people who have no idea this whole doctrine of salvation, how is it there can be people doing such good things? How can they do that? Don't they know they're rotten? Well, the humanist portion of our tradition affirms the worth and dignity. However, if you'll notice, my title this morning is not worth and dignity. It is the dignity of worth. I'm going to share with you briefly why I have a problem with not only the old anthropology about how rotten you really are, but the anthropology that is contained in our statement. It wasn't that way originally, and that it is not the case in Judaism that they hold to this idea of original sin and inherited depravity at the creation, the story of the eating of the apple and so on, and humanity fell. And when we fell, from generation to generation, that fallen state was there. That's not present in Judaism. What happens instead, things go kind of bad, so they create a new covenant. Things go kind of bad, so they create another new covenant. Things go kind of bad, so they create the final new covenant. And today we have all the Abrahamic religions. Judaism, Christianity, Islam. But there is no fall of man. Quite the contrary. When we talk about humanity, we come up with a whole different concept. We owe it to Augustine, Bishop of Hippo, who came up with the doctrine that the Orthodox Church, Catholic or Protestant, in Christian tradition, holds. And we are required to believe that if we are Orthodox. Have any of you noticed we're in a Unitarian Universalist congregation? Are you aware that we are the only denomination that we know of that is named after two doctrines and we're non-creedal? We're non-creedal, named after two doctrines. One of the doctrines is the Trinitarian formula. We're Unitarian. The other doctrine is you solve that problem of the fall of humanity by going through the necessary ritual your denomination requires, and then you get to go to no, we're universalists. Another doctrine. We believe, following the universalist tradition, we don't have a doctrine of hell because it's not in there. That humanity lives before a loving God, and therefore that's no longer an issue. Unitarian Universalists. Well, you know, I still have a problem with the anthropology. You see, inherent worth, I don't have a problem with inherent worth. But you know what I think? I think you can make choices that bring circumstances about that cause you to devalue yourself in relationship to how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you. Can you think of anything that you see in the news from day to day, week to week, and month to month that causes you to bring to question the worth that's going on there. Worth can be inherent. Dignity requires some action. Worth can be calculated on a ledger. Dignity requires some action. How you live, what you do, how you make choices, how you deal with others will determine the dignity of how you live your life and how you will be perceived. Dignity is not a static gift. It is something that happens in a process. Worth can be calculated by dollars and cents, and it can be locked in time. But dignity is something you do. You do dignified things. You speak honestly. You speak with care. You look after what happens with other people. You find out where there is need and how you might be the one who can fill it. What does it take to help someone, to support someone, to mutually get together and make life work, both for you and others, so that when you're done, you can give each other a hug and be very grateful for what just took place. And then you can look at it and say, that was a dignified response to a very deep and definite need. Dignity is something we earn. Dignity is something you do. Love is something you do. The feelings of love are the result of your doing. The acceptance of what has happened, if you do dignified things, is the fact that dignified things have been done and there is mutual agreement. I believe if we proactively choose to live our lives in such a way that we serve those around us and at the same time serve us, it's almost impossible to serve others and not serve yourself as well. That we then make real inherent worth and dignity in the lived outness of our lives. You know, we don't actually stand in too strange a group of people when we affirm that. It may not in any way, shape, or form affirm original sin and inherited depravity. But if we would step back 2,500 years and wipe out everything you know about science, humanities, all that knowledge, and put yourself back in a mythical worldview, the inherent worth and dignity can be translated into ancient Hebrew with the following phrase. And God said, let us make humanity in our own image. And in the image of God, God created them. Inherent worth and dignity, image of God. If you lived in the ancient world, it's translatable. That's who you are when you choose. And having said all that, I've said enough, probably a little too much. One of the things I always do, not always, most of the time. Any of you got anything to say? Any questions? Any answers I can find the questions for? Any disagreements you wish to make? Anything you wish to stand up and object to? We haven't had the offering yet, so you can't leave.
I had a problem with the first principle for quite a long time, because when I would look at some people in our politics, I'm thinking of one individual in particular, but I won't mention his name. I didn't see how I could see worth and dignity in that person, because he didn't seem to see it in other people. And the only way I could find worth in him was to think of him as he must once have been, a small child, unsure of himself, looking to see what the world meant and so forth. We're all in that position at one time, and that's the way I can see worth in him.
Thank you. I think we can very easily choose to behave and live in such a manner we destroy our value. And that's something I think we need to pay close attention to. Others?
Hello. I got a question for you.
Go.
So I'm still pretty new here.
Me too.
What what are the principles of the Unitarian Universalist Church?
That is, in fact, what we read when we were reading. The 7 people who stood up or read with the microphone, they were reading our principles. I think I can read them very quickly because, if I'm not mistaken, I should have them right here. The inherent worth and dignity of every person. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Don't forget meaning. The right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. The respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. That's it.
I really love that. I just want to say, I don't want to go on a speech or anything, but it makes me want to continue coming here. I've told people I'm a Discordian witch. I'm a pagan. I grew up Christian. I rejected Christianity completely. I grew up being raised a bigot. And I had a lot of problems within myself, and it was actually the Army that helped me fix myself. And I only came here originally 3 weeks ago on a whim. Somebody had said, hey, there's something called cups or whatever, and they were in, I think, New Mexico. And they had said that it was something to do with paganism, and so we started talking about it on our Discord, because I'm a part of a pagan community, and we had quite a few of our LGBTQ members telling us, oh, it's great, we love that place. Like, they don't really, a lot of them don't go anymore, but they love the place. And I really think, as someone who's like 26, young, growing up in this really weird time, it's not terrible time, it's just weird. I believe in what y'all are doing.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And thank you for your words. And welcome. Welcome. I've been around here, not here. I'm new here like you are. I've been around Unitarian Universalism for a long time. I'd like to say since Dirt was young, but Dirt was young a lot sooner than I got around. So, but when I hit the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Long Beach, California, I found home. Others, statements, objections, corrections.
I was also raised in a Christian atmosphere, and what gets me is our very first principle refers to the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And yet, quote, Christianity seems to find more and more ways to disregard that in the way they treat other people. And that's something that has basically driven me away from them. And I find that the Unitarian Universalists living that tradition are so much better placed to be good people. That's not to say everybody isn't or is, but on the whole, I find UUs are just really living their traditions.
Hopefully that's true.
Yeah.
And I want to add something to what you just said. I am not in any way, shape, or form anti-Christian. I want to be crystal clear about that. I don't care what the religious movement is. You can have a spectrum of views and beliefs within that movement, from ultra-fundamentalist to ultra-liberal. And as you go from one end to the other, you move from a closed worldview that knows the beginning of history and the end of history and everything in between to a group of people who look at the open-endedness of the future, see the open-endedness of the past, and see the need for us to interrelate to one another in our spiritual beliefs and so on. The bulk of Christianity does not have the problem of the closed worldview. Orthodoxies do to a certain extent, but even Orthodox movements today are open and willing to entertain. For instance, the Episcopal Church is an Orthodox church. It's Anglican Catholic. That's Orthodox. However, a Unitarian can be an Episcopal minister today. That means that the church is open in its understanding. Islam can be open in its understanding. All of them can be open in their understanding. It is the closed fundamentalists that will inevitably generate the problem. And by the way, a fundamentalist Christian, a fundamentalist Jew, or a fundamentalist movement can't tolerate the rest of their people either. It is the way it is. But I want you to know, I'm not anti-anybody. I believe the Spirit moves us in various ways. The Spirit's wonders to perform. Others. No others? In that case, I want to thank you for the opportunity of sharing with you today. And thank you for your participation in the conversation. I have always preferred, I don't believe any minister should stand up and speak and be the only one that gets to say anything. We need to be contradicted and put in our places now and then. We need to be challenged. Thank you, Byron. You're welcome.